Welcome to our fourth lesson on Unit 3. In this lesson we will be solving two-step and multiple-step inequalities. So your learning target obviously is to be able to solve inequalities that contain more than one operation. And when we solve inequalities that contain multiple operations, the way we're going to do that is to use the reverse order of operations, just like we did with solving equations. And we will use inverse operations to undo each operation that's involved. So let's jump right into some practice. We're going to solve the inequality and graph the solution set on a number line. So we have two examples here. In the first example, we have 7 minus 2t is less than or equal to 21. Remember, our goal is to get the variable alone. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and highlight our variable with the sign in front of it. Don't want you to forget the sign out in front. And 7 is being added to the negative 2t term. So since it's a positive 7, I want to subtract 7. And whatever I do to one side of an inequality, I have to do the same thing to the other. So now these 7's add to 0, and I have a negative 2t is less than or equal to 21 minus 7 is 14. And so the next thing we need to do, t is being multiplied by negative 2. So I want to do the opposite of multiplication, which is division. I'm going to divide by negative 2 on both sides. But here's where we have to remember that rule from our last video. When we multiply and divide by a negative, that means we need to switch our inequality. And negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. And we have t is greater than negative 7. So negative 7 is the number that goes on my number line. It has the equal to, so it's a solid dot. And it's greater than, so it's all the numbers that are to the right of negative 7. Letter B now. We have two operations. 1 minus 2n is divided by 3. So the first thing we need to do is to get rid of this division by 3. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 to get rid of the 3. So on the right, I will also multiply by 3. When I do that on the left, these cancel. And I am left with 1 minus 2n is greater than 21. Well, now I need to get rid of the positive 1, so I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. So when I do my addition, I have these adding to 0. Don't forget your negative sign. Negative 2n is greater than 20. And then divide both sides by negative 2. Since it's being multiplied by negative 2, we're going to divide by negative 2. And we end up with n being less than, don't forget to flip that, negative 10. N is less than negative 10. So negative 10 is the number on your number line. And then we want an open dot because it cannot be equal to, it has to be less than. And the numbers that are less than go to the left. So n is less than negative 10, looks like that. Here are a couple for you to try. Go ahead and bring your answers to these to class, and if you have any questions, be sure to ask. Sometimes you're going to have to simplify before you solve. So when we have more complicated inequalities, we might need to first simplify the expression on either one side or both sides and use our order of operations or the distributive property or combining like terms. There's a lot of different tools we have for solving. So sometimes we're going to have to do some of those things first. Here's an example. Our directions say to solve the inequality and graph the solution. So first of all, on the left-hand side, we have two like terms that we can combine. So we definitely want to do that first. Negative 4 plus negative 8 is negative 12. And then I'm just going to rewrite the rest is less than negative 5c minus 2. So now we have it completely simplified on both sides. Now we just need to use our opposite order of operations. So remember, I want to get the c by itself, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides. When I do that, here's what's left. I have negative 10 is less than negative 5c. These added to 0, so they're gone. Negative 5 is being multiplied by c, so I want to do the opposite and divide by negative 5. When I do that, these cancel, and I am left with c, but this time I need to flip that, right? I divided by a negative, and I end up with 2. So remember, we always want our variable to be on the left, so that says c is less than 2. So I need you to get used to and comfortable with writing those either way. Remember, the open side is toward the number, so keep the open side of your inequality toward the number. And the number that I need on my graph or on my number line is 2, so I'm just going to write the number 2 in there. And this time it's an open dot. It cannot equal the endpoint, so we want an open dot. And the numbers that are less than are to the left. And so we're going to shade to the left on our number line. Here are a couple more. Let's go ahead and work through letter A. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is use the distributive property. So when I distribute negative 3, remember I multiply negative 3 times 3, which is negative 9. And then I have to multiply negative 3 times negative x. So negative 3 times negative x is positive 3x. This is the part that most students get wrong, so be careful of that. And then we have is less than. This says 4 squared. Well, remember 4 squared means 4 times 4, not 4 times 2. So that is 16. Now we're ready to go ahead and use our order of operations. And we want to add 9 to both sides since we're trying to isolate the x variable. So when we add 9 to both sides, we end up with 3x being less than 25. And then we're going to go ahead and divide by 3. Divide by 3. And we get x is less than 25 thirds, which is 8 1/3. Okay, 8 1/3. So that's the number that goes on the number line. So down here we're going to do 8 1/3. And it's less than, so it's an open dot. So we'll put an open dot on 8 1/3. And less than is to the left. So we want the arrow pointing to the left. And those are our solutions. How about the one on the right? We have some fractions we're going to deal with. So don't be afraid of the fractions. There's nothing to combine together to begin. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the 1/2 since it is being added. So I'm going to go minus 1/2 on both sides. Minus 1/2. Okay, when I do that, these two will cancel, right? And here's what I am left with. I have 4/5 x is greater than or equal to, and I need to subtract these two fractions, but their denominators are not the same. So I need to change these into like denominators. So I'm going to multiply the two denominators and change them into tenths. Okay, and they are subtracted. The first one I multiplied by 2 on the top and the bottom, so I get 6/10. And the one on the right I multiply by 5/5. So that one gives me 5/10. Well, 6/10 minus 5/10 is 1/10. Okay. And my next step, I want to get rid of the 4/5. 4/5 is multiplied by the x term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is 5/4. And whatever I do on the left, I must do the exact same thing on the right. So now I can get rid of my 5s and 4s, and I just have my x is greater than or equal to, and I can eliminate my 5 and my 10, right? So this is a 1 and this is a 2. Now here is a common mistake. I'm going to give you another warning here. We're going to end up with a fraction. The numerator is 1 times 1, which is 1. The denominator is 2 times 4, which is 8. Some students don't pay attention to what's in the top and what's in the bottom, and they would just write the number 8. So make sure you know that it's 1/8, not 8/1. So this time I need to put 1/8 on my number line, so indicate where that is. And x is greater than or equal to, so that's a solid dot. And the numbers that are greater than or equal to 1/8 are to the right. So we want the arrow that goes to the right. Here are two for you to try. Again, don't be afraid of the fractions. They're not going to be that bad. So bring your answers to those to class. And our last slide says the average of Jim's 2 test scores must be at least 90 to make an A in the class. Jim got a 95 on his first test. What grades can he get on his second test to make an A in the class? So again, this is an example where you need to learn how to translate the words into the mathematical terms. So we know that he's going to start with a 95 score. And he has another test that he's going to take. We don't know what the score is going to be, so I'll just say T. And it says the average has to be at least 90. So we're going to have a 90 in here. And to calculate the average, we take and we add them up and divide by how many we have. Well, we're only dealing with 2 tests. So we're going to add the 2 tests and divide by 2. And that number has to be greater than or equal to 90. So it can be bigger than 90, and then he would still get his A, right? All right, so how are we going to solve this? Let's see. Well, we have this thing divided by 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2 to get rid of that. So I need to multiply the other side by 2 as well. So my 2 will cancel here, and I'm left with 95 plus whatever his test score is, has to be greater than or equal to 180. Well, now we need to get rid of the 95, so we'll go ahead and subtract 95. Whatever we do on the left, we must also do the same operation on the right. So we end up with his test score, Jim's test score, has to be greater than or equal to 180 minus 95. So we need to figure out what that is. Well, let's see, I'll borrow from my 8. 10 minus 5 is 5, and looks like he needs to get at least an 85 to make his A in the class. So he can get an 85 or above in order to get an A in the class. That'll do it for this video. See you next time.